Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
I will continue today to give you a bit of a highlights of what we had discussed yesterday. Primarily what we had done yesterday was a discussion of the fact that in whatever software we are using, we need to have the facing pages option, and when we calculate the size of the page in the software that we are using, we must remember that the page size is a little larger than what we are going to be left with when we have to print and trim the book. The trimming excess must be, there must be allowance made for it on the page. So your software page size is actually your trim page size plus the excess, which is known in publishing terminology as bleed. Bleed is universally accepted as 3 millimeters. On the facing pages option, bleed is required on the top, bleed is required on the outside, and bleed is required on the bottom. Therefore, your final measurement that you will feed into the software that you are using will be width plus 1 bleed, and the height will be height plus 2 bleed. After this, we had discussed that we need to choose the page layout palette. Sometimes the page layout palette is open on your document by default. If you can't see it, you can go to the Windows menu at the top of the page and access the page layout palette, after which you need to look for something called the A master page. You double click on the master page, and there you get a pair of facing pages like this with a spine. This line going down the middle of the page indicates the spine of the book where it will be folded. There we create little boxes on all 4 sides of the pages. This is a shortcut method of marking off the page margins. Yesterday I had mentioned that these can be 0.5 inches or ½ inch, which is a minimum yet comfortable page margin. Sometimes, depending on the book that you are designing, the margin boxes you can make to 0.75 inches. Sometimes, in the case of a very big page size, you can even make it 1 inch. It will depend on what you are designing. Once this is over, we get an area between these boxes, which becomes effectively what we call our text block. Inside this text block is where we will operate and place all our text. Sometimes you may decide to have running heads, in which case you draw another text box on top and put whatever text will appear. When I'm saying whatever text, but we have discussed that in such cases, the name of the author is always on the left hand or the verso page. This is the name of the book or the title of the book, or the chapter, or say the short story, or whatever part of the book that file will represent. After this, each book that you design may or may not use the running head, but what it will definitely use is the page number. You cannot have a book without page numbers. You yourself will have difficulty navigating it. Page numbers can come at the bottom or at the top. It is a decision that you can take. Page numbers are represented on your typesetting software by a symbol. The symbol looks like this and may be got with a single click. When I'm saying a symbol, please be aware that if you just manually replicate this from your keyboard, the purpose is not served. It is what we would call a placeholder symbol. It simply indicates to the software where and how aligned your page number will be in the final printed page. So don't mimic this by actually typing it. All you need to do is draw a text box either at the bottom or the top of your screen. When the cursor flashes inside that text box, we press Command 3 or Control 3 depending on whether we are working on a Mac OS or on a PC. This generates this symbol. Having got the running head and the footfolio, our second task is to decide what typeface to use, and the size must be reduced. Usually softwares reproduce a font in default. Whenever you type something, it will show up in Helvetica 12. Helvetica is not usually advised for good professional design. 12 is too big for incidental font usage, all of which must be secondary to the main text. So change the typeface and change the size. It can easily be 9 or even 8 because your body text eventually will be in size 10, at a minimum could even be 10.5 or 11. Having done this, we have in fact finished setting up our master page, and we must go back to the page layout and come back to page 1. This is more or less where I had left you in my last lecture, and then I had said when you come into page 1, you double click inside the text box. Page 1 will look like this. It will look like a single page. On the right hand side, your page number will automatically appear here. Your running head will also appear on the top of the page. Please remember, page 1 will be the start of the book. Page 1 often will possibly have a chapter title. In that case, it will be known as the display page, and we cannot have any additional text appearing above the heading, which must come here fairly large to establish that this is the start of something. On display pages like this, the heading, what we normally call the heading, the formal term is the display title. The display title is meant to be the most prominent thing on the page, and there can be nothing above it. In this design, because the page number is appearing at the bottom of the page, it's not distracting from the display title on the top. We are allowed to have it there, only at the bottom. If you have it on the top, coming in from your master page, please delete that box manually. Now, even before we get to the display title, here is your automatic text box. You must, when your cursor is flashing here, you must do Command E or Control E depending on what system you're using, and a window will open up in your computer which says where is the Word document that you're looking for, where is the Word document that contains the text for this book. Locate that Word document and then say open. The minute you say open, you will notice that all the text in that document not only comes into these pages, but that the typesetting software actually supplies as many additional pages are required to hold that text. So you don't have to worry whether you need to provide 100 pages or 50 pages or 20 pages for that chapter. You need just that one page showing up on your page layout palette. You come into it, you press with the cursor, you get the text, or you import the text from the Word document, and the software is able to generate as many pages as you require, and every page will have the page number in the identical place as you had put it on the master page. It will have the running head exactly where you had put it on the master page, and most importantly, on every single page, the text will start on the same line and end on the same line, and this is vital. If you look at any book that you have close to you, you will notice as you turn the pages, your eye always falls on the first line, and the first line is always in the same place. This is made possible by having these text boxes drawn in the same place on both sides of your master page. Remember, the master page is a template for all the pages in your document. There will be odd occasions like the display titles where you don't need the running head. In that case, those exceptional instances you can manipulate manually by going to that page and pressing delete. But 90% of the pages in any document will follow the master page, and therefore it is vital to set up the master page very, very carefully. Another thing that you must keep in mind is sometimes when you are working, when the main text has come into these text boxes, then when you look at your pages, you might feel that your page number is too large, you might feel that your running head is too small. Instead of fixing it page by page, I would request that you fix it on the master page. Because just imagine if you have 100 pages, instead of fixing it 100 times on the top of every page, you can simply go to the master page, fix it once, and the master page ensures that every page where that correction needed to be made has been made, because every page is actually replicating the elements on your master page. Right? Now, after we have got the text, there are a few standard changes that need to be made. We are now venturing into a territory that I have been discussing with you, but I haven't been able to demonstrate so far. We will now be contemplating the niceties of typesetting. The first thing that you do once all the text has come, the first step is to press Ctrl A or Command A. The easy way to remember this is A stands for all. Okay? Command A or Control A effectively in software terms means select all. So what happens is with one click you select all the text in the document. If it is not selecting, ask yourself why not. It is possible you haven't double clicked inside the text box and the software is confused about whether you are selecting all the boxes on the page or whether you want to select the content of the text box. In softwares, in typesetting softwares, every time you double click on a box, remember this, the double click, it's a very useful tool. Every time you double click on a box, it lets you select the content. On a picture box, with which we will work a little later, on a picture box, if you double click, the box remains constant and you are given the ability to move the image within the box. In a text box, if you double click, nothing happens to the box, but you have access to the text inside the box. This is very important. So make sure that your cursor was flashing. Make sure you had double clicked on that first text box. Press Ctrl A or Command A and you will see all the text in the entire document will get highlighted. After having done that, we have to change the typeface. We have to change the typeface. Also what we loosely call the font. Often people who are working on the Word document prefer to work in Times New Roman. Times New Roman is a great font to be working with because all computers have Times New Roman loaded by default. You could be working somewhere, the person editing the book could be working somewhere else, the person who has written the book, the author, could be working in yet another, in fact, country, yet another city. They could have a very new computer, they could have perhaps a very old computer. It doesn't matter. Times New Roman displays across all softwares and all systems. So when people are working on the text of a book, when they are working on editing, writing, revising, rewriting, filling in the gaps in the argument, this is known as the editorial process that happens once a publishing house takes on a book for publication. It doesn't usually go straight from the author to the typesetter. There is an in-between process that often helps books very much, because the editor is a professional person who specializes in the use of language, who specializes in the use of grammar, who specializes in fact-checking, who understands how books must unfold. Is an argument working properly? Is the introduction too long? Maybe another chapter is required. Maybe the book doesn't have notes, but the content requires notes, etc. Maybe there is a spelling mistake somewhere, a place has been not spelled correctly. a personality has not been spelled correctly, a date is actually an incorrect date, etc., etc. There are many, many, many very detailed aspects of a text that a writer, in the heat of their writing, the heat of their inspiration, trying to grapple with a lot of facts, data, etc., writers are sometimes not able to pay attention to these minute details. In fact, it is not their job. That is why publishing houses have editors who get that, who receive that manuscript, and then they do this kind of detailed, sometimes revision, sometimes a bit of rewriting, guiding the author, polishing the text to make it as better, a slightly more improved version than when it came in. So, all of that, it's best to do in Times New Roman. You don't have to worry about whether the author can read your document or not. The editor doesn't have to worry, the author doesn't have to worry. Times New Roman shows up in all computers across all systems. However, Times New Roman is a working font. Good typographic design, good typesetting, professional book design does not use Times New Roman in the body text. I have, I think, touched upon the idea of serif fonts and not serif fonts. If you are confused, a serif font is a font like Garamond, is a font like Cochin, is a font like Scala, is a font like Baskerville. Sometimes you will have them already loaded in your machines. A good typesetting means when the text of the book comes onto the page, we must change it from Times New Roman to something else. The best way to do that, instead of having to select individual paragraphs, do select all by pressing Ctrl A, go to the font menu, look for the font menu at the bottom of your screen or on the top, depending on the software that you are using, and choose a serif font. Just for the purposes of this class, I will say choose Garamond. Okay? The minute you choose Garamond, text will change to Garamond. Minimum size for text on the main text on the page is minimum size is 10 point. Sometimes some fonts are built smaller, in which case we go up to 10.5 or we go up to 11, but minimum is 10. So, select all, change the typeface family, change the typeface size. These are your basic changes, but they are universal changes which will apply to the entire book. After this, somewhere alongside your font menu is an option called leading, which may be represented by an arrow in the vertical direction like this. You may find a little button where the arrow appears like this, vertical, up and down. Up and down means leading. Leading refers to the space between the lines or interlinear space. Okay, don't be confused. Leading stands for L. Lines begin with L. So, leading is the space between the lines. This is a very easy way to remember it. Sometimes a bit of, like level 2 typesetting requires the type have a bit of leading, that you increase the interlinear space a little bit. In an earlier presentation, you will remember the calculation is that leading is 120% of your font size. This is, somebody has come up with this. So, if you have 10-point font, you can in fact have 12-point leading. Okay, leading needs to be applied. You need to stretch it out just a little bit. Interlinear space helps the text be more readable. Do not go overboard by this. If you have 10 point, you don't have to put 15, 16, 17, 18 leading. It will stretch it out too much. Too much white space between the lines then becomes negative. If you read one line, then you are having to search for the other line because there's so much white space. That is not advisable. Gentle separation of the lines is advised. This is a formula that somebody has come up with. You may yourself look on the screen and see what is working with you. Be aware that leading will expand the text a little bit. So, while applying leading, you must keep in mind whether your ultimate page count is going up. It is a good way to sometimes swell the text by applying leading. Sometimes in leading, if you type 0 point or you write auto and you press enter, you get the automatic leading that comes with the font, which means you are wasting no space. If you have to do very tight typesetting, you don't have much room for, spreading things out too much. You have to keep it tight. There's a lot of text and your page count, you've been given a fairly close and tight page count. Then while you have got your select on still on, while all the text is still highlighted, change the font family, change the font size, and then simply make sure leading is auto or leading is 0 point. Some value or the other will show up in leading because it is reading the default interlinear space that comes in from Microsoft Word. If you want to be very safe, go with auto leading because you're saying, I'm not getting into all this, I'm not spreading the text out too much, let's stick to auto leading, which is perfectly okay. Auto leading means the leading supplied by the person who built that font. All fonts have an auto leading, right? These now are one round of universal changes which apply primarily to the font. There is now another lot of universal changes that will come in. For this, you need to look at a tab somewhere on your screen at the bottom or at the top that says paragraph. Okay. First, in typesetting, first we make the changes to the font. The second change we make is to the paragraphs. So look, often it's part of a longer strip which will appear by default at the bottom or at the top of your screen. In paragraph, 90% of the paragraphs in your text require interpara space, which in typesetting terminology is called space after. Okay. Look for a little button that says space after. If you are confused, take your mouse and wait over every little button in the paragraph bar and little auto labels will pop up guiding you where to look. Space after at a very minimum can be 0.03. Sometimes it can be 0.05. We put 0.05 sometimes for works of literary fiction, sometimes when we want to spread the text out a little bit, but otherwise 0.03 interparagraph space is perfectly okay. The second quality or paragraph sort of interface that you need to interact with is something called first line indent. The first line indent, you will remember when I was discussing the text, if this is your page, this is your first paragraph, imagine that the blue box is your text box. The first paragraph is always against the margin of the blue box or your text box. Therefore, this is known as a flush paragraph. I have discussed this, but now you can see for yourselves what it means. A flush paragraph is flush against the margin of the text box. All paragraphs that begin a chapter, all paragraphs that begin a section, all paragraphs that follow subheadings, these are first paragraphs of that section or chapter and they must be flush. Second paragraph onwards, there is, as you can see now, a first line indentation that becomes important. Second paragraph onwards, right? You can see the first line indent in my terrible wavy lines, but here is the first line indent, here is the first line indent. An indent means it is pushed in from the margin, it's dented in from the margin. The rule for the indent is it should not be more than 3 or 4 characters of the line above it. Don't give a huge 1-inch indent. Sending the eye too far into the line is not advised. 3 or 4 characters above the line. So at Seagull, we have arrived at a first line indent of 0.25 inches, which is perfectly adequate for all the paragraphs, right? So paragraphs also get two universal changes. One is the paragraph space after, and then we have the first line indent. After finishing these universal changes, then what you do is you come back to the first page and you slowly begin now to look at the text, because after typesetting requires, one is the universal changes which are applied to font and which are applied to paragraphs. After the universal changes, we will now deal with the exceptional changes that need to be made. These must be made locally. So, for example, you come back to page 1 and you look at the page and see, do you have a display page? Does it have a display title? Will the display title be a bit bigger? It is advised. Will the display title be left aligned, center aligned, or right aligned? Will the display title have a big drop after it? In which case, put your cursor at the display title and add space after, which is bigger than 0.03. Usually for display pages, from the top of the page, from the display title, I would even advise a full 1 inch drop, no problem. Again, if you are confused, please look at a book from your bookshelf and you will see whenever a chapter begins, whenever a short story begins in a book, the title is up there and there's a bit of a gap. That gap to the first paragraph is achieved by using a big value in the space after option. Then you put your cursor to the first paragraph and you do the reverse of what you have done, which is you put your paragraph there and you tell yourself, this is a first para, it must be a flush para and I must remove the first line indent. How do you remove it? You just change the value from 0.25 to 0. And this is then how you go down. You look at the minute you find a subheading, you ask yourself, do I want to keep this in this font? No, I must make it a bit bigger. If my body text is 0.10, maybe my subhead could be 12. Perhaps it could be 14. Perhaps I could make it bold so that it is a little more visible. Perhaps sometimes I could try bold small caps. If I'm feeling bored with the serif font, perhaps for my display title, my running heads, my page number, and for my subheadings, I could think of a non-serif font. Okay? So this is how, after making the universal changes, we go through page by page by page and we tackle the exceptional bits of text that appear in the form of subheads, sub-subheads. You may need to put a picture somewhere, in which case you can then draw a picture box. There is a separate picture box tool. Picture boxes usually come like this with a cross. Into it, you make the same command. You say Command E or Control E. Into it, you then bring a picture. You will be told by the editor, put picture 1 on this next to this bit of text, put picture 2 over there, and so on. You will then follow your instructions. And ultimately, you get to the end of the chapter. I should keep reminding you, I will not be standing beside you while you're working, but please, of course, continue always. Every time you change something, please use Control S or Command S to keep saving. There might be a power cut, your machine might hang on you, some disaster will happen, you will have forgotten to save your document and you will lose all of these typesetting changes. Now, in brief, before I move on to the next bit that I want to discuss today, when we work with the inside of a book, it is mandatory that when we open the software document, we choose an option that will be visible to us that activates the facing pages. However, when now I will discuss something I have discussed fleetingly but not in great detail, when we create a cover artwork means all parts of the cover are present and that it has been made to measurement provided by the printer. The measurements are exact, the spine is there, and there are things called crop marks. Crop marks are little marks, literally little black marks like this, that appear on the edge of your design and that help the printer and the binder to cut Crop marks at the outer edges help the cutting of the cover out of that big sheet on which it has been printed, and other crop marks help the binder realize where the jacket will be folded or where the paperback cover will be folded, right? They are not necessarily always looking and interacting with your design and saying, oh, this is so beautiful, I can tell, this must be the spine, this must be the front flap, etc. They don't know this. They're looking at the marks. The first marks apply to the cuts, the second level marks apply to where the folds will come on the book. When you are working on a cover artwork, you need to open a single flat document. The document will be not vertical but horizontal like this. It will need to be quite a large document when you are designing a hardback jacket, and it will have these various parts on it in the form of boxes. You may remember this from some of the cover designs that I shared with you. Again, I have not very good drawing skills. This is the back flap. This will be folded inside. This is the back flap. This is called the front flap. This is the spine. You will remember seeing this on the bookshelf. Often the logo of the publisher appears here at the bottom. This is the front cover, which will get the title. There will be a picture at the back, etc., author's name, blah, blah, blah. Here often you have a box that contains what we call the barcode, the price, the website. You will all remember books that you've seen like this. Here there will be a write-up on the book, a summary of the book. Sometimes we call that the blurb of the book, right? When you open a hardback, you want to know what the book is about. You instinctively open it and you start reading the description on this front flap, and the back flap is saved usually for a write-up on the author. This is the basic preparation for a jacket artwork, and then we invariably have these crop marks, as I've just mentioned, which help in the cutting and the preparing of it. Now, having arrived at this, I will make one small point here about images, and then I will discuss cover design in a little bit of detail with all of you, because I have just touched upon it, but there are various considerations that need to be kept in mind. One small issue that I want to mention here is that when you are working with images, and by images I mean pictures or photos of any kind, right? Pictures, photos, it could be clip art, it could be a map, it could be a chart or any visual material. There are some rules for visual material when you are using it for a print publication. The first is something that we call resolution. Resolution must be 300 dpi. Later I will show you where you can check this. You can in fact check this in Adobe Photoshop, but resolution must be 300 dpi. Many images, if not all images, often downloaded from the internet, have a lower DPI of 72 or 96. Those are unusable in that condition in a print document. The printing press is capable of printing 300 dots. If this is an inch, right, of ink or color, the printing press is capable of printing 300 dots in every inch in order to give you a crisp and clear picture, photo, map, diagram, whatever, right? 300 dots, DPI comes from dots per inch. So we need to give the printing press all our visual material that also has those 300 dots per inch. Now imagine this that I have drawn for you is a visual sort of representation of 300 dots per inch. You can see how tightly it's packed. In the same inch, right, in the same inch, if you only have 72 dots, now can you see how terrible that picture looks? That inch is not going to be covered with dots. There will be gaps between the dots and the picture will look fuzzy or blurred or broken, or what we often, a term we often use is pixelated. because Photoshop understands those dots. In Photoshop's terminology, which is more or less recognized right now as a sort of premier photo software, in Photoshop terminology, the dots are known as pixels. And if you don't have enough pixels per inch, the end result on the printing press will come out looking very, very terrible. So the first thing we need to keep in mind when we're dealing with images for print is that the resolution is 300 dpi, and then we have a concern about the color mode. If it is a black, what we would loosely call a black and white object, it's either got only black on it. If you can imagine a map, like a line drawing, some kind of botanical diagram, a picture of various parts of the human body, depending on a biology textbook, etc. If it only uses black lines, or if it is a black and white photograph, which means it has black and shades of gray. In Photoshop terminology, that is a grayscale picture. Photoshop gives you the option to use grayscale. Many times, images downloaded from the internet look as if they are black and white. They look on the screen as if they are black and white. But if you go to Photoshop and you check the color mode, you will notice they are in fact what we call RGB. Okay? RGB is red, green, and blue. RGB is the color mode for all objects that are displayed on a screen. RGB is the color mode for light. Together, R, G and B give you white, which is the light that shines at the back of every screen. So all images on the internet, all images on the phone, on any website, anything you've downloaded, even if you have used a scanner to scan an image, if you've taken a photograph with your phone, if you've taken a photograph with a digital camera, all of these will be in the RGB mode, even if you have chosen the grayscale option or the black and white option on your phone. Be very careful. The minute you open that image in Photoshop, you will realize it's in RGB. You must change it to grayscale if you want it to stay black and white, or you must change it to CMYK. CMYK represents the 4 inks that are used in the offset printing process or in the big printing presses. CMYK is also the 4 inks used by desktop color printers, whether they are inkjet printers or they are laser printers. C stands for cyan, which is a shade of blue. Cyan, then you have magenta, then you have yellow, which you can barely see on this screen, and then you have the key color. The key color is the darkest color. I say key because whenever you print a colored object, there is a cyan impression on the paper, there is a magenta impression on the paper, there is a yellow impression on the paper, and there is a black impression on the paper. The black impression is the darkest and is often used by the printer to see if all of the impressions are falling exactly one on top of the other. It's used to fine-tune the position of the printing plate on the machine rollers. Some of you may or may not have seen very badly printed books where it looks a bit hallucinatory. You can see the pink outline, you can see the yellow outline. That is, the impressions have not fallen exactly one on top of the other. Black is the color that is used as the key color to make sure that all of the impressions are aligned. That process is also known as registration. Registering and making sure all the impressions are falling one on top of the other. Every color that you can possibly add to your design when you are working with a colored design, or if you have colored images on the page, the printing press understands all those colors. Your software understands all those colors for a print publication through a combination of these 4 inks, which is why many people often refer to colored printing as CMYK printing or 4-color printing. Please be aware of this. You can check for colored, any image that is a colored image in Photoshop in color mode, it must show up as CMYK, and any image that is a black and white image that will be printed only using black should be a grayscale image. We do not work with RGB. As I have just explained, the printing press has 4 big rollers. Each roller gets 1 ink. So you have a cyan roller, a magenta roller, a yellow roller and a black. There is no room for a red or a green or a blue roller. So if you're telling a 4-color machine to print in 3 colors that are not present in that machine, you will obviously get a very peculiar colored object on the page. That means you forgot to change the color mode. It's very simple. It's a 1-click mode. All you need to do in Photoshop is go and say from color mode, hey, I don't want RGB, I want CMYK, and Photoshop makes that picture such that it can be interpreted in 4 inks and not 3 colors. The last thing I want to tell you is JPEGs, GIFs, PNG, all of this is very light, very compressed image formats which are perfect when you are sending email attachments for approval, when you are loading pictures on Instagram, when you are sending images on WhatsApp. WhatsApp in fact does its own compression. So JPEG, here are some of the things you may have seen: .jpeg, .gif or GIF as you may call it, .png. All of these formats are light, compressed formats and perfect for sending images across your phones or posting on Facebook, etc. All images on the internet are JPEGs, GIFs or PNGs, etc. However, when we work in print, again from Photoshop we must go to File and we must save as in the TIFF format. The TIFF format is the absolutely uncompressed format of that picture and will ensure it looks very good and has the best resolution and is crisp and clear when you go to print. Please remember, do not use JPEGs, do not use GIFs or do not use PNGs for a print publication. You will need to spend some time, whether that image is going on the page or whether that image is going on the cover. You must spend some time. It's okay to download pictures from the internet, provided of course you have made sure that they are available for use, or even if you have bought them from an image agency or what we call a stock image agency, it's perfectly okay. Just be aware, and I have explained this at length earlier, be aware that you are allowed to use that image with modification, with text on it for commercial use. Okay, otherwise the creator of that image can make trouble for you and say that you used it without permission and you did not obey the conditions they had set on the use of that image. Wherever you are getting your images from, after clearing copyright, after paying the fees or getting the permissions, whatever is necessary, you must spend some time in Photoshop opening those images, checking their resolution, checking their color mode, and then saving them as TIFF. Photoshop also lets you, of course, make a whole variety of other changes to the image. You can lighten them, you can darken them, you can crop them, you can straighten them. You can cut the head off a watermelon and stick it on a giraffe. And then, of course, you have a very strange kind of fruit salad which you don't know what to do with, which might eat you before you eat it. But we will not descend into frivolity here. What I am trying to say is that there are a variety of special effects that Photoshop allows you. You can change a blue flower into a red one, etc., etc. All of that is secondary, that is second level design. Okay, this that I have told you, checking the resolution and checking the color mode, these are mandatory and should be part of your design hygiene, and you should do this before you actually embark on a design, whether it is a design of the inner pages or it is a design of a cover. Having explained some of the very basics of both typesetting and cover design to you, I would now like to take you in deeper into a discussion of cover design. A book cover should indicate the genre to which the book belongs. Some of you may or may not be familiar with the word genre. It is a fancy sounding word for category. Is this book a book of fiction? Is this book a book for children? Is it a book for young adults? Is it a school textbook? Is it a poetry book? Is it a cartoon or a comic book, etc. These are what we refer to as categories, or like I said, if you want to sound a bit fancy, you can use the word genre. It is very important to understand in which category the book will fit when it finally emerges into the world, when it is finally published and gets into a bookshop and is sitting on the bookshelf. You as the reader know there are bookstore categories when you enter a bookshop. If you are looking for a cookbook, you go to the cookbook shelf. If you are looking to buy a book for your younger brother or sister, you look at the young adults or the children's section, depending on their age. Even there within the children's section, if they like to read mysteries or if they like to read horror and fantasy or they like to read adventure, you yourself could look at self-help, etc., etc. These are categories or genres, and many publishers like to communicate that category or that genre through the very presence of the book cover, through the use of the visuals, the colors on the cover, the kind of typography there is on the cover. They want you in a very short span of time, wherever you may be looking at that book. You could be looking at the book on an online shopping site, you could be looking at it at an airport bookshop or at a station or in a library. They want the reader, even before reading anything more about the book, they want the reader to just look at the cover and get at once an understanding of what the subject matter is. In my next lecture, I just want to leave you with this thought. If you have time, look at some books around you and see if you can tell what they are just by looking at the cover. In my next lecture, we will discuss the motivation, the reasoning, the logic, the preparation that goes behind coming up with a book cover that is both different, yet that represents the genre and that will attract the reader's eye.
Hello and welcome to this piece of literary snippet. British humour doesn't have a very high standing in the world. When people talk about it, they usually do so with a certain degree of disparagement. Yet all this is, I think, rather unfortunate, because if I read out to you a certain section from Jerome K. Jerome's famous novel Three Men in a Boat, you will realize that not only is British humour genuinely funny, it is probably even better than some of the other samples of humorous writings that you might have read in the recent past. The story that I'm going to read out is told by Jerome, who thinks he is suffering from some kind of a malady. I remember going to the British Museum one day to read up the treatment for some slight ailment of which I had a touch. Hay fever, I fancy it was. I got down the book and read all I came to read. And then, in an unthinking moment, I idly turned the leaves and began to indolently study diseases generally. I forgot which was the first distemper I plunged into. Some fearful, devastating scourge, I know. And before I had glanced half down the list of premonitory symptoms, it was borne in upon me that I had fairly got it. I sat for a while, frozen with horror, and then in the listlessness of despair, I again turned over the pages. I came to typhoid fever, read the symptoms, discovered that I had typhoid fever. Must have had it for months without knowing it. Wondered what else I had got. Turned up St. Vitus's dance. Found, as I expected, that I had that too. Began to get interested in my case and determined to sift it to the bottom, and so started alphabetically. Read up ague and learnt that I was sickening from it, and that the acute stage would commence in about another fortnight. Bright's disease, I was relieved to find, I had only in a modified form. And so far as that was concerned, I might live for years. Cholera I had with severe complications, and diphtheria I seem to have been born with. I plodded conscientiously through the 26 letters, and the only malady I could conclude I had not got was housemaid's knee. I felt rather hurt about this at first. It seemed somehow to be a sort of slight. Why hadn't I got housemaid's knee? Why this invidious reservation? After a while, however, less grasping feelings prevailed. I reflected that I had every other known malady in the pharmacology, and I grew less selfish and determined to do without housemaid's knee. Gout, in its most malignant stage, it would appear, had seized me without my being aware of it. And zymosis. I had zymosis evidently from boyhood. There were no more diseases after zymosis, so I concluded there was nothing else the matter with me. I sat and pondered. I thought, what an interesting case I must be from a medical point of view. What an acquisition I should be to a class. Students would have no need to walk the hospitals if they had me. I was a hospital in myself. All they need to do would be to walk round me and after that take the diploma. Then I wondered how long I had to live. I tried to examine myself. I felt my pulse. I could not at first feel any pulse at all. Then all of a sudden it seemed to start off. I pulled out my watch and timed it. I made it 147 to a minute. I tried to feel my heart. I could not feel my heart. It had been beating, but now it had stopped beating. I have since been induced to come to the opinion that it must have been there all the time and must have been beating, but I cannot account for it. I patted myself all over my front, from what I call my waist up to my head, and I went a bit round each side and a little way up the back. But I could not feel or hear anything. I tried to look at my tongue, I stuck it out as far as ever it would go, and I shut one eye and tried to examine it with the other. I could only see the tip, and the only thing that I could gain from that was to feel more certain than before that I had scarlet fever. I had walked into the reading room a happy, healthy man. I crawled out a decrepit wreck. Our friend next visited a doctor, and there he got a prescription which said to eat well, to go for long walks, and not to worry his heads over things he didn't understand. See you in the next episode of Literary Snippets.
Hello, I am Professor A.K. Sharma and I teach sociology in IIT Kanpur. I am taking up a question, what is world population crisis? World population crisis refers to explosive growth of population which occurred during 1950s and 1960s. For millions of years, some people estimate that perhaps man appeared on this planet Earth 5 lakhs years ago. It took these 5 lakhs years for world population to reach first billion in 1820 AD, and that means that the population in ancient times must have been rising at rate 0.000 something percent per year. Now, in 1950s and 1960s in the world, you find that population started growing at rate more than 2% per year. This is what is meant by population crisis. You can imagine that if a population grows or anything grows at 2% per year, then in about 35 years time it can double. And obviously, particularly in the context of less developed countries, it had implications for poverty removal, for employment generation, for maintaining health, improving life expectancy, raising educational levels, etc., etc. The reason behind this population crisis was improvement in life expectancy or improvement in general health standards of populations. You may not be knowing, or you will be surprised to know that about 100 years ago in our country, life expectancy means average age of death or average age of life, whatever you say, of a newly born child was only 20 years, and today it has reached the level of 68 years. Much of this improvement in less developed countries occurred in 1950s and 60s, and therefore, with improvement in health, improvement in life expectancy or average age of birth, average age of death, and population started growing at explosive rates, and people started writing about this. This is population explosion, or this is population crisis. And now one can say that the period of peak growth rate is over, and from 1971 onwards in the world as well as in our country, growth rate of population has started declining. Now, in India, you may like to know what is the current growth rate of India's population. Currently, India's population is growing at 1.5% per year, and the reason is that after sudden or unexpected improvement in health conditions in 50s and 60s, which led to population crisis, we find that today average number of children has also started coming down. So, there was a time when average number of children per woman was around 11 or 12, now it has come down to 2.5, and therefore, the growth rate of India's population has come down to 1.5%, and we can hope that in the future means in the coming decades, even if nothing changes on the front of fertility or number of children, India's growth rate of population will decrease further and eventually come to a zero level, as said by the 11th 5-year plan of India. And now the major cause of high growth rate of population is not high fertility, but the age distribution of population. So, we have a high percentage of population at the younger ages, and that is the cause of high rate of growth of population. Eventually, when population of India will also age like population of other developed countries, our growth rate will start falling. Thank you. Now, we will meet in the future.